We are celebrating 25 years of Martin Luther College. Just what does a Martin Luther College alumnus need to know about his or her school? We're going to take a look at that today in a presentation entitled Big Words and Wells Acronyms, MLC, the First 25 Years. The first big word we encounter is the word amalgamation. Amalgamation was a word that was tossed about in the early 1990s through a committee called the Feasibility Study Committee, in which they recommended that Martin Luther College and Northwestern College of Watertown, Wisconsin would be joined together to form one new college. Also included in that study was that Martin Luther Preparatory School and Northwestern Preparatory School would be combined into Luther Preparatory School. So we took two colleges here, one formed in 1865, Northwestern College in Watertown, Wisconsin, and moved it here to join with Dr. Martin Luther College, which started in 1884. This included moving students, faculty, families, programs, and staff to New Ulm. In year one, imagine, if you will, some of the problems that this new institution encountered. Not only did we have the blending of athletic teams, we had the conversation of whether to be NAIA or affiliated with the NCAA. That caused a lot of arguments and perplexing debates on campus. The second was merely blending student groups such as choirs, drama groups, band. The third involved blending faculty. How would certain faculty members teach certain courses? For example, Professor Doze and I, who are still remnants of the original faculty, both taught Shakespeare at our respective institutions prior to amalgamation. So how are we going to divide that up? Those were questions that the new faculty had to answer. Then, of course, was the blending of the student body. How do you get these disparate student bodies, one all male and one 2/3 female, to join together into one student body to complete the mission of the institution? That was an issue that a lot of people were worried about. The other issue that was haunting the Synod was upgrading the infrastructure at New Ulm, particularly technology. We'll talk a little bit about that later. The New Ulm campus had long been neglected as far as upgrading its infrastructure. And so in order to accommodate the new student body, the campus needed to be upgraded. And then finally, what about the Sprinter? What to do with the Sprinter? A little story about the Sprinter. Apparently, in the year prior to amalgamation, the Sprinter, which was housed on the Northwestern College campus just outside the auditorium, disappeared one evening. The new president of Martin Luther College received a message in which he said that the Sprinter would be returned if it would be displayed on the new campus at Martin Luther College in New Ulm. There was a lot of debate about this. I won't name names, but I do know some of the people involved are still hesitant to talk about the issue. But nevertheless, as many of you realize, on the south side of the Luther Student Center stands the Sprinter, or squats the Sprinter in this case, who arrived on this campus shortly after the campus began in 1995. There was a lot of misinformation about what was going on campus that first year. The first thing I heard professors aren't getting along, which was totally untrue. Yes, there were some tense moments. Yes, we had some differences of opinion. I would call it sort of like walking on eggshells would be the better description. We were careful of each other's territories. We were careful of each other's opinions. The second one was that the students were fighting. This was also untrue. I think there were probably a contingent of students who didn't want to be here for their senior year, who had spent 3 years in Watertown, and that's understandable. But for the most part, the students got along really well. I was impressed, in fact, at how quickly they melded both on the athletic fields as well as in the drama and choir and music areas. Somebody suggested that New Ulm was a terrible place to live. Despite what you think about New Ulm was not a bad place to live, and I think most of the people who came here have discovered that New Ulm is a pretty nice place to live as far as having a small college campus and a place to raise a family. The courses were watered down. Some suggested that because the courses were amalgamated, because pastors were taking courses that with teachers, that the courses were watered down. This is also not true. Some courses changed, some courses morphed, some courses I think probably got more difficult. But nevertheless, the courses were not watered down. And then finally, and here's the kicker, one said nobody's going to go to New Ulm to go to college. This was probably the biggest concern synodically, that no one would travel to New Ulm to come to college. As you'll find out, all of those issues were dealt with rather quickly. In fact, Martin Luther College opened up with a higher enrollment than both previous two schools combined. We also had some other early challenges. The first dealt with curriculum. Should courses be cross-taught or not? Cross-taught meant pastor track course, teacher track course. Are they taking them together? Which courses would they take together? Early on, there were fairly separate courses in both curricula. And so they didn't have a lot of courses together. Today, that's not true. With the general ed revision, by the year 2000, many courses were being cross-taught, both by pastors and teachers. It's to the point now where I hardly even recognize or know who's pastor track or who is teacher track in my courses. The 2003 changed course names and course numbers and got everyone sort of on the same page regarding the curriculum. So now we all were taking the same classes pretty much in the freshman and sophomore years, except for the ones that were distinctly unique to their major. The second challenge was oversight and governance. Both campuses had to have some way of organizing the curriculum, and in the new college, they came up with a curriculum oversight committee, which were elected members of the faculty who controlled things like faculty policy, academic policy, new course offerings, etc. And that is still operating to this day. Then there were various iterations of administrative structures, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Who's going to govern this? How is it going to be governed? But more importantly, and probably most importantly, was the accreditation given to us by the Higher Learning Commission, which guaranteed the fact that we were able to still offer federally funded loans as well as being an accredited college in this country. The third challenge was the enrollment. Although we opened up with 772, within 7 years, the campus grew to 1,063 students. Imagine, if you will, 370 more students on campus, at least probably closer to 400 more students on campus than are on campus today. And so that posed a lot of problems, particularly with dormitory space, but also with class sizes, classroom space, etc. And then there was the daily scheduling issue. In the first year, the daily scheduling issue was a problem. I'll leave it at that. We'll come back and talk a little bit about that later. The first thing I'd like to talk about is the campus master plan. To prepare for the new move, there were only a couple of things done to prepare for the college in 1995. The first major move was that Summit Hall was retrofitted. Summit Hall had been condemned in the late 1980s into the early 1990s, but was still maintained as a good building. And so the Synod poured a ton of money into retrofitting it and getting it out of condemned status and making it available as a dormitory. Summit Hall, architecturally speaking, is a wonderfully designed building and stands to this day. Built in 1911, that's still a strong building and still one of the more popular eyesights on campus. That was retrofitted and resurrected, if you will. The second and the major construction dealt with the Link. Most of you know the Link is the middle part of the Wittenberg Collegiate Center, but for years before, there was the Wittenberg Center, which was the building to the north, and Old Main, which is the old building to the east, if you will. And so they connected the two buildings together to join one massive building to make it more indoor, to create office space, to create some more classrooms, to upgrade the labs on campus as well. One of the major issues that was also accomplished with this was the installation of the elevator in the link, which connected all three buildings and made it ADA compliant. The rest of campus was retrofitted. What that meant was all the infrastructure was upgraded. Buildings were toned, they were tuck pointed, they were painting inside, there was minor remodeling inside, but the bulk of the retrofitting really dealt with Summit Hall in particular. Professor Glenn Bodie from Northwestern College at the time came up and was here the year before amalgamation in 1994, preparing the campus to get ready for amalgamation in 95. Professor Bodie spent an inordinate amount of time on campus laying wire, getting the campus ready for its internet structure that we have to this day. Prior to this, we did not have internet access except for some local nodes. We did not have widespread technology as we do today, and Professor Bodie brought that to campus and really upgraded the technology on this campus. Now, what's happened since 1995? The two major constructions on campus was the chapel. Many of you noticed that, but the chapel did not exist. Just as you face the chapel, just to the left was an old boiler house that is no longer there. It stood between the chapel and what's now the pond out there. That was torn down, the old boiler house, and that was later reconstructed and moved to the westish side of the Luther Student Center. That's a relatively new construction where the boiler house is. At the same time, that was to make room for the new chapel, which is put in situ now as you see it. That project also included adding Lake Olson as a runoff. That's the pond. It including moving the tennis courts from that location. Where the pond was is where the tennis courts were. They took the tennis courts, moved it across the street to their present location, and then added not only the parking lot next to the tennis courts, but also the parking lot adjacent to the chapel. What happened was that along that side of the Waldheim Drive, as it was known, were 5 faculty homes, 5 faculty brick homes, which were sold and moved off campus. Some of them are still in the area, but that was to make room for the parking lot and the tennis courts. Another change since 1995 has been the MLC seal. Most of you notice that the MLC seal sits outside the main entrance in what we call the flag parking lot. It wasn't always there. For years, it was originally installed between the Wittenberg Collegiate Center and the library, in that intersection of the sidewalks. But because of Minnesota weather, it became very difficult to maintain during the winter months. And so they removed it and placed it in its present location in the flag parking lot. One of the bigger things that I think you don't notice is the off-campus development of what's called the Academy Fields. We called them the Academy Fields since 1975, but those are the fields now where the soccer pitch and the baseball field are located. The Synod had owned approximately 40 acres, which were to be used for a future Martin Luther Academy in the long term. However, since Martin Luther Academy wound up moving to Prairie du Chien, that no longer became feasible. And so the 40 acres that we had there was used as a intramural lot, undeveloped intramural lots. We rented out leased out part of that to a farmer who grew corn, approximately right where the soccer pitch used to be a cornfield. And so by 2010, we developed the soccer pitch, and a few years later, the baseball field. We added fan seating, press boxes, and parking. And soon, later this year, construction will start on the Betty Cohn Fieldhouse on that same site. Also off campus, where the early childhood center sits right now, which was an addition as well, was a place called Highland Manor. Highland Manor was the New Ulm nursing home for a long time. Because of the explosion in enrollment, Highland Manor was moving, and it moved down to Oak Hills down by the hospital. It became available. The college purchased it and used it as a dormitory for many years. And so after that was kind of expended, they tore it down and built the Early Childhood Center on that location. The other part of the land now sits the Highland Regency Apartments, which was sold to the Lutheran Home in Belle Plaine, and they erected those just a few years ago. So those have been the major changes on the campus master plan since then. All along the way, there have been all sorts of projects done, retrofitting Centennial, working on the tuck pointing of the Aula, or what you know as the music hall, maintaining upgrades in the college locker rooms, maintaining upgrades in plumbing in Centennial, maintaining upgrades in the plumbing in the Luther Student Center. All of these things are ongoing. Martin Luther College has had 3 presidents. The first president, Reverend Theodore Olson, had served as president of Martin Luther Preparatory School in Prairie du Chien. He received the call and arrived on campus in 1995. But wait, you said, the college started in 94. Correct. He was called by the governing board in 1994 to begin oversight of preparing the campus for the amalgamation in 1995. And so President Olson was on campus here in 1994 preparing the campus for that joining together. President Olson retired in 2007 and was succeeded by Reverend Mark Zarling. Some of you remember Pastor Zarling, President Zarling, who retired just this last year. And now President Gergel has taken over as of 2020. And if you'll notice, there's a trend of 13 years, so we can pretty much predict that President Gergel will retire in 2033 if everything goes according to plan. So those are our first 3 presidents of Martin Luther College. One of the more interesting things that happened was an administrative restructuring. The initial campus had a very simple way of organizing instruction. You had the president, and beneath him you had a vice president of education, a vice president for pastoral ministry, and a vice president of student life. The first 3 vice presidents, vice president for education was Arthur Schultz, vice president for pastoral ministry was Gerald Plitzowite, and the vice president for student life was Dr. John Lorenz. And so those 3 worked that way for the first 5 years of the campus. The governing board wanted to investigate structural changes and administrative changes as the college was growing and as the college was becoming more and more involved in things on campus and with the collegiate affiliations that they were with. And so they explored a restructuring. And the restructuring is pretty much what we have today. The restructuring included a vice president for academics who had 2 deans underneath him. So the dean for education and the dean for pastoral ministry. It had created a position of a vice president of administration, which is kind of the right-hand man for the president, especially when the president is gone, dealing with budget issues, strategic planning, etc. The vice president for mission advancement was created, but not till a little bit later, a couple years after this initial one. And then a vice president of enrollment management, and that was sunsetted in 2008. It was deemed no longer viable at that point in time. So of the remaining VPs that we have, we still maintain the VP for student life. We still maintain that issue, but we no longer have the enrollment management one. I mentioned that the first year was kind of a mess on the daily schedule. Imagine, if you will, daily schedules beginning at 5 to 8, yes, 7:55, 50-minute classes with 5 minutes between classes. You have one class, which you could have Monday, 3rd hour, Tuesday 6th hour, and Thursday 1st hour. Or you could have it Monday 1st hour, Tuesday 8th hour, and Friday 7th hour. It was a random selection of course offerings. It was a computerized scheduling system that the college was using, and it became very frustrating to the college instructors who were trying to teach in a very methodical way. And so a committee was formed to design an alternative. The current block scheduling that you have was developed by this, what was called the scheduling committee, who also included student choice as part of that. So the students have a choice to direct their own schedules based on what the courses that they would like to take. And so the current block scheduling roughly began with courses still beginning at 7:55. The change in the daily schedule began around 2010 when a second scheduling subcommittee moved classes to 7:30 a.m. and included a weekly convocation hour, 4th hour Wednesdays, and added 10 minutes between classes rather than 5. And this was implemented in around 2010. And so this is the schedule we have today. As you can tell, it's a much more reasonable schedule, because what wound up happening is there would be some days that would be really lopsided in your schedule in that what I would call the random scheduling method. Acronym number 1, MECC, M-E-C-C, stood for the Ministerial Education Curriculum Consortium. Consisted of the chairman of the BPE as well as the BME, as well as the presidents of the 4 institutions. They recommended curricular changes to the institution as well as other schools in the system. This resulted in 2 major changes that are still with us. One, the added minority cultures requirement, and the eventual adding of the interpersonal communication course. It also modified the foreign language electives for the pastor track. And we can get into more detail on that when you read my book. The second big word is licensure. Licensure became a major issue in the early 2000s as the college began to seek Minnesota state licensure and get licensed for its graduates in teaching. This was a significant change and a significant move in trying to get the college licensed to be able to teach in public schools. The first acronym is called PERCA, the Program Effectiveness Report for Continuing Approval, which we have to do every couple of years to prove that we're still doing what we're supposed to be doing. It's an ongoing curriculum review to keep our licensing standards. Another one is called the PELSB. We have to answer to the Professional Educator Licensing and Standards Board, which used to be the Minnesota Board for Teaching. So we have achieved that. We are licensed in any number of programs. We began with elementary licensing first, and then by 2010, most secondary programs were licensed for Minnesota state licensure requirements. Elementary licensure started in the early 2000s, and finally by 2010, most of our programs are fairly well licensed. This represented a huge shift in philosophy in the Wisconsin Synod because it meant that you would have to step inside a public school classroom in order to receive a license. That was a significant change in the student teaching activities. Acronym number 4, RIF 1 and RIF 2, RIF 1, RIF 2. Suddenly, financial woes rocked Synod in the early 2000s. A large foundation which had funded Synod didn't do so well in the stock market. There was a stock market crash. Synodical financing was sort of in trouble, at risk, we'll call it that, and that's the best thing we'll call it. And so the financial woes led to a reduction of budget cuts Synod-wide. At Martin Luther College, this resulted in the reduction in force in 2003, RIF 1, which resulted in 5 professors' calls being terminated because of need. This occurred because of the financial issues that we had and also the sudden decline in enrollment that we were experiencing based on the offsetting higher tuition, lower need, a number of factors were at play here. And so 5 professors' calls were terminated because of that need. 5 years later, another 5 positions were also eliminated due to the funding shortfalls that we had by 2008. These two things caused a ripple effect synod-wide in the termination of calls without cause because it led to many debates and continuing studies. Being terminated for need because there was no need of the teacher or the instructor became almost standard, if we will. Another major event was the Gen Ed revision. Emphasis was to revise and redesign the general education core. A Gen Ed committee was defined that set a set of courses that all MLC students would take. The goal was to reach a manageable number of credits for all students. Because of the unique nature of the college, there were categories that needed to account for SPAM and SEM specifics. The major changes were reduction in English courses and history courses, and music and Phi-Ed requirements were also adjusted. Now, some of the more highlights of the other parts of our history. At the time that we were formed, MLC, Dr. Martin Luther College had been a member of the NAIA and the NLCAA, National Small College, NSLCAA, the National Small College Association. Northwestern had been members of the NCAA Division III. When we formed, we got NCAA 3 approval because of Northwestern's prior approval. Professor Jerome Cruz came over from Northwestern and served as MLC's first athletic director. Professor Cruz was the head basketball coach that year, but unfortunately and sadly, he died on Easter morning in the college's initial year. And so the college was without an athletic director for the next year and a couple of months. Professor Barb Leopold served as the interim AD with help from other members of the staff for the next year. In 1997, Professor James Unke arrived and began serving as MLC's athletic director. Professor Unke is still here today, so he's been here a long time. At that time, Martin Luther College was both affiliated with the NAIA and the NCAA. Once the Upper Midwest Athletic Conference was formed, all conference members had to drop their NAIA affiliation. And so we are no longer affiliated with the NAIA, but rather we are only an NCAA Division III school in all of our athletic events. Now, there have been some highlights. Number one, Coach Unke served as the UMAC commissioner, the conference commissioner, from 1998 to 2008, the first 10 years of the conference, really, 10 of the 11 years. In 1998, the men's basketball team qualified for the NAIA National Tournament. In 2002, the men's soccer team qualified for the 2002 NAIA National Tournament as well. In 2012, the MLC women's basketball team was the first team to qualify for an NCAA tournament. They won the conference, were co-champs of the conference, and lost to the number 3 team in the country in the first round. Anna Borman, a cross-country runner, was the first individual to qualify for the NCAA cross-country meet. And Todd Brasso was the first individual to qualify in the track events in 2018 and 2019 when he qualified in the event called the high jump. Now, more recently, the MLC football team has enjoyed immense success and qualified for the NCAA playoffs in both 2018 and 2019. Now here's kind of an interesting story, a little history about MLC. I'd like to challenge each of you to sing the fight song. Wait. I don't hear anything, and I probably won't. Little history on the MLC fight song. The official fight song exists. It was just never taken up by the student body. In the early 2000s, Professor Paul A. Wentland hired someone to write a school fight song, which we did, and it's still in the archive someplace. What became the unofficial school fight song for many, many years was known as the kangaroo song, in which the students would jump up and down in the bleachers singing the kangaroo song. They had an inflatable kangaroo. Now that has since been, shall we say, put on the shelf. But all I can say is for many, many years, the unofficial school fight song had a slightly Australian tinge to it. That gives you some of the highlights of MLC's first 25 years. A combination of administration, curricular changes, physical plant changes, and some off-campus issues that required people to work together in a little different way that they had been used to working. With that, I'm going to close it now and say thanks for listening.